Machiavelli never trusted the man who needed to be liked, because the need to be liked is a lever, and once someone finds it, they own a piece of you that you'll never fully get back. You felt this, the time you softened an opinion because you were afraid of how someone would react to the real one. The time you stayed in a conversation 20 minutes longer than you wanted to because leaving felt like it would cost you something in someone else's eyes. The time you said yes to something you didn't want, purely to avoid the discomfort of being seen as difficult. By the end of this, you'll understand why detachment, real detachment, not performed coldness, is one of the most strategically underrated disciplines a person can build, and why almost everyone mistakes it for something it isn't. Not caring gets misunderstood constantly, usually by people who've never actually done it. It doesn't mean indifference to outcomes. It doesn't mean cutting people off or pretending nothing matters. Machiavelli's version of detachment was narrower and far more useful than that. It was the discipline of not needing other people's approval of you in order to act correctly. That's a completely different skill than not caring about people at all. And confusing the two is exactly why most attempts at not caring collapse into either fake coldness or eventual resentment. The first principle is that approval seeking is a hidden tax on every decision you make. Most people don't notice they're paying it because it's baked into how they were raised to think about other people's opinions, check the room's reaction before committing to a position, read the temperature before saying the true thing, adjust before anyone's even objected. This isn't kindness, it's a dependency. And like any dependency, it gives leverage to whoever controls the supply. The moment someone realizes you need their approval, they don't have to say anything explicit to control your behavior. They just have to withhold it slightly and watch you adjust. Machiavelli understood that the prince who needed to be loved by everyone had already handed his crown to whoever was best at manipulating affection. And that's just as true in a boardroom or a relationship as it ever was in a court. The second principle is that detachment isn't the absence of care. It's the redirection of where your care is aimed. The person who has genuinely mastered this doesn't stop caring about outcomes. They stop caring about being perceived favorably while pursuing those outcomes, which is an entirely different target. Think about what changes when you make that shift. You can deliver hard feedback without needing the person to still like you afterward. You can hold a boundary without needing the other person to agree it was fair. You can walk away from something that isn't working without needing closure or a good final impression. None of that requires coldness. It requires that your sense of having done the right thing stop being outsourced to whether someone else approved of it in the moment. Here's the part worth sitting with, because it's where most people get stuck. This shift feels selfish the first several times you do it, even when it isn't. If you've spent years calibrating your decisions around other people's comfort, the first time you don't do that, it registers internally as a violation, even when the decision itself was completely reasonable. That discomfort isn't a signal you're doing something wrong. It's a signal you're doing something unfamiliar. And those two feel identical from the inside until you've done it enough times to tell the difference. The third principle is that people treat you differently the moment they sense you don't need their approval, and almost always they treat you better. This seems backwards until you understand the mechanism. Approval-seeking behavior signals availability, and availability in any social or professional dynamic gets tested. The person who visibly needs to be liked gets pushed on, probed, negotiated against harder, because pushing on someone who needs your approval reliably produces movement. The person who clearly doesn't need it stops getting tested in that particular way, not because people respect them more as a matter of principle, but because pushing on them doesn't produce the reaction that makes pushing worthwhile. Machiavelli's princes weren't necessarily more likable than their rivals. They were simply harder to manipulate through affection, and that made them more dangerous to oppose. This is where detachment becomes genuinely strategic, rather than just personally healthier. Once you stop needing the room's approval, you gain access to information the room was never going to give you while you needed it. People stop managing you the moment they realize managing you doesn't work. Their real objections surface because performing agreement no longer buys them anything. Their real priorities show up because pretending to align with yours doesn't extract the approval they were hoping for. Detachment doesn't just protect you from manipulation, it makes the people around you more honest, often without them realizing why. The final realization is simpler than the three principles that built toward it, and it's the one Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone who's written about power since. The need for approval and the need to survive got tangled together a long time ago in human wiring, because for most of history, being disliked by your group actually was dangerous. But that wiring is running old software in a world where most of the approval you're chasing has no real stakes attached to it at all. The colleague's opinion of your idea, yeah, none of it threatens your survival the way your nervous system insists it does. Strip that false urgency out, and detachment stops feeling like a discipline you have to maintain. It starts feeling like the only accurate way to see what other people's approval was actually worth all along.